Hello, in this World of Warships video I'm going to be looking at the Bogue, the Tier 5 American aircraft carrier, and well, straight off the bat I'm going to say that I don't particularly like this aircraft carrier for two main reasons. The first is its choice of aircraft loadout, which I'll just go show you. It gets three options. Stock, it gets the Mark 5 Mod 1, which has one squadron of fighters and one squadron of torpedo bombers, which it's a bit weak because it's got very few squadrons. You can only send out 12 aircraft at a time, but it's kind of got the mix that I like. The Mark 5 Mod 2 squadron gets, well, Mark 5 Mod 2 flight control setup gets three squadrons, two of dive bombers and one of torpedo bombers, so that's your bomber heavy loadout. And well, the advantage it has over the Mark Mod 1 is that you can send out 18 aircraft at a time, but you can't have any fighters. And the third option is the Mod 3, which is your fighter heavy loadout. You get two squadrons of fighters and one of dive bombers, but no torpedo bombers, and torpedo bombers are still the most powerful form of bomber in the game. Should also mention that the Bogue doesn't get a lot of aircraft. When fully upgraded it gets 28, stock it's 24, and 28, I mean, with either of these two, you know, the three squadron mods, you send out 18 at a time, so you've only got 10 aircraft in reserve, which means you can actually take a lot of losses before it starts really eating into your combat capability kind of thing. Or I shouldn't say combat capability, your ability to deal damage to the enemy. The other big reason that I don't like the Bogue is that it's very easy to detect. 11.9 kilometers detection range is quite a lot. Just like the Zuiho here, the Japanese equivalent, gets a detection range of 8.5 kilometers. So the Bogue, it's very easy for enemy ships to detect. And it's also got a very slow speed of 17 knots, so it can't run away from enemy ships if it has been spotted. And it's also not particularly manoeuvrable. 640 meter turning radius and 12.6 second rudder shift time is not fantastic, especially if you're having torpedoes fired at you and you can't run away from me either. The one big strength of the Bogue is its AA guns, of which it gets an AA strength of 37. The bulk of this comes from your 20mm anti-aircraft guns, of which you have 27 scattered around the side of the ship on various platforms. You also get 16 Boffer's guns, the 40mm ones, which is probably one of the most powerful anti-aircraft guns in the game at the moment. You've also got, well, these 227mm guns, which are sitting at the back of your ship. They don't do a lot in the anti-aircraft role. They are also your only secondary guns, in which they're also not particularly useful, but well, it's better to have two guns firing back at enemies rather than none. Having said that, they've only got a 4 kilometer range. I didn't know that, so that's actually really short range. Listen, even American destroyers could fire torpedoes at you, the low tier ones, and you couldn't fire back at them with your secondaries. Now, what else is there to say about the Bogue? Oh, its combat capability. It gets 36,500 hit points, which it's a fair bit for an aircraft carrier of this tier, but it's not really enough considering that you can't defend yourself and you can't run away. So basically when you get spotted and people start shooting at you, you're probably going to die, and that's basically, the number's kind of irrelevant. It could be 1,000 whatever. You'll just die quicker, but you'll die nonetheless. But well, I say that, and Tier 5 is also kind of a good tier for aircraft carriers, much like Tier 4 was, just because enemy ships, they're only just starting to get decent anti-aircraft batteries. If you come up against Tier 6 or Tier 7 ships, your aircraft won't last very long at all. But at Tier 5 you only really have to watch out for the American battleships and the American cruisers. I suppose the Congo's also got fairly good anti-aircraft guns, but those are probably it. Everything else you can basically well, not quite sink at will, but they won't shoot down very many of your aircraft. Anyway, I've got 3 replays to show you, one with each aircraft configuration, so let's get right into that. So this first one is with the stock configuration. Well, that's what I'm calling it. It's got 1 fighter and 1 torpedo bomber. You could also call it the balanced aircraft loadout because it's kind of what the Bogue gets in terms of a balanced loadout. But there are some pretty big disadvantages with using this loadout. I've already talked about the first one, which is that you actually just get less aircraft that you can put in the air at one time. But there are a few others that will become apparent. Anyway, you see me, I'm steaming along. I'm actually going at, well, not quite full speed there. I'm trying to go at full speed, but 11, just getting up to 12 knots now. So I'm getting close to it, and basically you can't really move anywhere in this ship. What I've done is I've kind of ordered my fighters. Originally they were going to the centre, then I decided I'm going to send my torpedo bombers off to the right to try and hit some targets. Then I send my fighters even further to the right because enemy aircraft tend to sneak around that way. Then I decided no, fighters can go back in the centre to respond to enemy aircraft. Wherever it is on the map, the fighters can get there pretty quickly from the centre. I see most of my teams going north, so I order the Bogue to head north itself. Spot an enemy cruiser and decide that's not really worth torpedoing. Now I see some enemy fighters. I figure my fighters are nearby, so we should be able to take them down fairly quickly. They're Japanese, it's a Japanese fighter squadron, so it'll be my 6 fighters versus the Japanese 4, so I expect to win pretty quickly here. Shoot down 1 Japanese aircraft pretty quickly, but they managed to shoot down 1 of mine. And there's some Japanese torpedo bombers trying to sneak past us, so I'm hoping we shoot down the aircraft really quickly. Actually, here comes a lot of Japanese bombers. But we've actually almost finished shooting the fighters. We've just killed all the fighters. So I ordered them to chase down one of the enemy torpedo bomber squadrons. And then try and send my torpedo bombers in on this battleship here. And it's not a great angle to launch torpedoes at, but I didn't want to muck around under anti-aircraft fire for long. Just watching my fighters. They're shooting down more bombers. The torpedo bombers have dropped their torpedoes, and luckily the enemy battleship turned the wrong way, and I was able to get 3 hits on it. And I caused a bit of flooding, but this is one of the disadvantages of having this loadout, is that I don't have a second bomber squadron to essentially capitalise on the flooding I've caused. That battleship will just repair the flooding, which means they'll do very little damage, but if I had a second squadron of torpedo bombers or dive bombers hanging around, I could then launch another attack on that battleship and either cause more flooding or light a fire that will burn for a minute and a half until its repair capability is back ready. But because I can only put up 2 squadrons at a time, simply not an option in this configuration, and that's actually a really big disadvantage of this setup because flooding and fire are 2 of your really big damage causes in an aircraft. Damage causes, damage doers, whatever. I'm just watching the enemy or my allied aircraft carrier shoot down some enemy torpedo bombers, but this other squadron is going to get some torpedoes off against our battleship. Look at its anti-aircraft guns there. Not very effective, but it looks good. Sent my fighters, they're just taking off now to go and engage those enemy torpedo bombers, but I doubt they'll actually arrive there in time. My torpedo bombers are taking a long time to rearm because there are 6 of them. Japanese torpedo bombers get going much quicker. I see another wave of enemy bombers coming in from the north, so I send my fighters up there to engage them. Again, they probably won't arrive in time, but they might be able to catch a few on the way back. Torpedo bombers are ready, so I get them up and head them over towards where the enemy battleships are, but I don't order them to attack yet because, well, I want to manually aim my torpedoes. Send my fighters to kill the enemy fighters, and I get lucky that the enemy fighters choose to engage me with, well, I've got friendly anti-aircraft support you can see firing in here, which means that when I shoot down 2 of the enemy fighters, my allied anti-aircraft guns actually get the other 2. There's a single torpedo bomber, which I send my fighters after. But I don't think they get it. I think the anti-aircraft guns get that guy. Yep. So now I just send my fighters to just escort that battleship in case any more bombers show up. And I'm going to focus on this torpedo run here. So I'm just trying to get my fighters, get my bombers to a point where they will be able to launch torpedoes perpendicular to the enemy battleship. Order my fighters down to the south because there's a wave of torpedo bombers coming in, but then I see some dive bombers nearby and decide that I can actually do more damage against these dive bombers before they get their bombs off. Again, I'm just trying to manoeuvre my torpedo bombers into position. They're quite slow at this tier, but they're low tier torpedo bombers. It's basically what you'd expect. But we're getting about ready to launch our torpedoes here. Now, I'm actually set them up to try and hit both these battleships, but neither one's actually particularly good for either battleship. Order my fighters onto some torpedo bombers. You see the first battleship's dodged my torpedoes, but the second battleship seems completely unaware that they're there. I know it's turning into them, so it's probably spotted them, but I think it was a bit too late, to be honest. And I managed to get 2 hits there, which did a little bit of damage and caused some flooding, but as I said, most likely that flooding will be repaired very quickly and I can't do any subsequent damage.
Group 3, returning to ship.
I actually kind of screwed that up there, as in my torpedo bombers, they didn't return to the ship immediately, so I ordered them to, but then I accidentally ordered them to go over and try and engage the enemy aircraft because I thought I was on my fighters. So then I sent my torpedo bombers back home, and there were some enemy fighters chasing them, but my allied fighters came and saved me a bit there. And my fighters are just coming to land now. But this engagement's not looking good for my allies' fighter aircraft. So I'm hoping my fighters will get ready soon so I can get out there and help them.
Group 3, awaiting instructions.
Friendly cruiser just died.
Group 3, returning.
Fighters are... well, they're just taking off now, so I'm getting them to head over towards these enemy fighters. But they're taking too long to take off, so my allies are going to lose all those aircraft.
Group 2, airborne.
And that's what they look like. I forget what they are. It's not actually an aircraft I'm that familiar with. It's one of the kind of 1920s US biplane fighters. I can't remember what it is now. Maybe the T4M? No, I think it's a Boeing. So it'll be the F something B? I don't know. I think the T4M might be my torpedo bombers. Anyway, I'm sending my fighters down to the south because my allied torpedo bombers are being chased by enemy fighters, and I was hoping to intercept them, but well, the enemy's not really catching up with my allies' bombers, but I'm not really catching up with them either. My torpedo bombers are ready, so I send them up towards that enemy battleship, and I've managed to reach my destination, and I'm basically on the front lines here. There's a battleship just 9 kilometers in front of me. So I really actually don't want to get much closer to the enemy, but I kind of feel like I should be moving. So I just keep myself going at half speed for now, which is a bit of a mistake because I forget that I'm only going at half of my maximum speed. See there's 7.7 knots. My fighters have finally managed to catch up to the enemy, and they shot down 3 of them just like that.
Standing by for instructions.
So then I send them north to cover this battleship because that looks like the most likely target the enemy's going to be trying to bomb in the near future. But unfortunately they're on the completely the wrong side of the map, so it's going to take a while for the fighters to get into position. I was thinking of torpedoing the New York, but I decide, well, this other New York up here is a better target. So aim my run, try to adjust it slightly, but it makes no difference.
Group 3, we are under attack.
And here they come. Just order my fighters onto those torpedo bombers while we're waiting.
Group 3, returning to ship.
And the torpedoes are looking good, but I misjudged the speed slightly. So I only get 3 hits. Does about 15,000 damage though, and again causes a bit of flooding. My fighters obviously aren't going to make it in time to stop these bombers, but I order them in to hopefully try and intercept them on the way back. But again, it doesn't look like they're going to make it in time for this either.
Group 2, taking fire.
Oh, we've spotted the enemy aircraft carrier. But I don't want to engage the enemy torpedo bombers within range of that Yetsuzoiho. They've got a fair bit of anti-aircraft guns themselves, so I just pull back, order my fighters to cover that battleship, but it dies before they get there. There's another squadron of torpedo bombers that have taken off, but as I said, I don't really want to fight them until they leave the protective, let's just call it the umbrella of the anti-aircraft fire of the aircraft carrier. So instead my fighters are just kind of circling aimlessly, waiting for the enemy to leave its safety. I send them back to escort this battleship. And the enemy's capturing our base now, which puts me in a bit of a quandary here. Because I've got my torpedo bombers back up and ready, but they aren't going to be very effective at trying to torpedo this destroyer that's capping our base. But there isn't really anyone in a position to do anything about it other than myself. So I was kind of sent them near the cap where they could either turn north to engage a battleship or south to engage that destroyer, and I was kind of hoping someone would do something about that destroyer. Meanwhile, I send my fighters after one torpedo bomber that's left the safety of its aircraft carrier, and I shoot it down very quickly. I head back to just escort that battleship. And no, I'm clearly going to have to come in here and try and deal with this destroyer myself. It's basically my team's only hope of doing this, or getting a win out of this battle. But we can't actually see the destroyer right now, so I'm going to have to spot it first. Meanwhile, I was also spotted there for a bit, but the enemy didn't bother shooting at me, which was very lucky, and I've managed to pull behind an island now, so I'm out of direct line of sight. But not for very long, I'm basically trapped there. And just look for this destroyer.
Group 3,
and there it goes, so I order an automatic attack run.
Group 3,
and it doesn't let me adjust it, but this is a bit of a laugh here. My dive bombers are approaching, but they haven't dropped their torpedoes yet, and I couldn't tell you why. And, well, apparently that's what they wanted to do, fly over the destroyer and fire the torpedoes directly away from it. So that was basically my team's one chance of winning the game, and my torpedo bombers managed to ruin it in a very odd fashion. So I ordered my ship to head in towards the enemy cap, hoping someone would hit that destroyer and I can kind of sneak in there and somehow those battleships won't notice me. But there's no one in a position to actually do anything about the enemy cap, so we're about to lose this one, unfortunately. Any second now. Well, yeah, there we go, we've lost. As I say, aircraft carriers are kind of weak just because it's such a long reload time on their aircraft, including the flying there in a way. But anyway, I did alright, 93,000 credits, 772 experience. I was top of my team, shot down 20 enemy aircraft, which is pretty alright for this tier when aircraft carriers only carry 28 or 30. You see, I did more than 40,000 damage with my torpedoes and only 3,000 with flooding. I only lost 5 aircraft while I managed to shoot down, as I said, 20 enemies, so that was a pretty good ratio. This next game I'm showing you uses the bomber heavy loadout, where I get one squadron of torpedo bombers, which is the one currently taking off, and 2 of dive bombers. Now, dive bombers have recently been buffed. They're still not as powerful as torpedo bombers, but they are a lot more useful than they have been in recent patches. It's been a while since I've read the patch notes. I should have read them just before I did this video, but it didn't occur to me. Anyway, according to the patch notes, they got new types of bombs which apparently just do more damage than they used to, but it also seems to me that they're a lot more accurate, so it might be in the patch notes, I might have just missed it. Anyway, I ordered my 2 dive bombers to just follow my squadron of torpedo bombers, so that way I can give my torpedo bombers orders and it'll effectively give all 3 of them in order to go somewhere. Because I'm probably going to be clicking a lot, since I might have to be dodging enemy fighters. And I'll send them down basically, well not quite, but basically to my south, just to see if there are any enemy battleships moving along past these islands where I can kind of put a torpedo run into them and try and do some damage. But we spotted an enemy Cleveland, so I put a nice big dog leg into my aircraft's route, because the Cleveland, well, it's got very powerful anti-aircraft guns, and it's particularly effective against my aircraft because it's a tier 6 cruiser and my aircraft are only tier 5. And basically I think even probably just flying past it, my aircraft will get slaughtered. So I see an Omaha coming up right where I was planning on going, and that's also got not anywhere near as effective anti-aircraft guns as the Cleveland, but still enough that I don't want to fly over it in the hope that there might be a battleship somewhere immediately behind it. I see a Congo way back there, but decide it's not worth it, when I can see a New York and a Miyagi kind of unescorted off to, well, completely the other side of the map from where I was originally heading, but unescorted battleships are good targets. So I order my dive bombers to go slightly north and then start focusing on manipulating my torpedo bomber. And I actually kind of botched this first attack. I see 2 New Yorks and a Miyagi. I decide on the Miyagi, partly because it doesn't have any anti-aircraft guns, so I can get my torpedoes to drop very close to it and not take any casualties. But as I said, I kind of botched this attack because I forget that the Miyagi is actually a really fast battleship. So I just don't aim anywhere near far forward enough of the Miyagi. So yeah, at the time I thought that was right, that's basically how I want it, but the Miyagi's really fast. So all of my torpedoes managed to miss. I'm just a bit more used to torpedoing American battleships of late. But anyway, I send 1 squadron of dive bombers in front of it, 1 from behind. Again, this actually wasn't that smart of me. Like, I originally did that because I assumed my torpedoes would hit and cause flooding, and now I want to cause lots of fires. But what I've actually just done is I've caused 3 fires, which is exactly what I want. Because I caused them all at the same time, he just puts them all out immediately, and they don't do a lot of damage. Having said that, I still did actually a lot of damage because 5 bomb hits actually do a fair bit now, especially since I don't think the Miyagi gets a lot of deck armour. I mean, I say 5 bomb hits do a lot, they probably do about as much as, you know, a torpedo or 2. And now, here's one of the reasons I don't like bomber heavy loadouts, is that I've got nothing to do while my aircraft return to the carrier and rearm, and then they'll have to take off and then head on to the next engagement. And all I've got to do is wait and just see what's happening. So it looks like the enemy's doing a pretty strong push around the west of the map. So that's obviously going to be where I'm going to have to put my next effort into, just to try and blunt this enemy's attack. But unfortunately I have also seen some enemy fighters operating in this area, and my aircraft, they won't, oh, they'll last a while. See, there's some fighters just there. They'll last a while if engaged by enemy fighters, but not very long, and definitely not, you know, I can't really afford to take a lot of casualties. Actually, I think that, oh, it's a bit blurry on my screen, but I think it's 7 dive bombers and 3 torpedo bombers in reserve. So if I take, you know, 4 of my torpedo bombers get shot down, I'm only firing 5 torpedoes every minute or so.
Group 2, ready.
I've also actually kind of misplayed here in that I've sent my aircraft carrier too far to the back of the map. Just, it takes a very long time for my aircraft to turn around because of that.
Group 2, airborne.
So I've got my aircraft up, and I've just ordered them, well, to hover over that island, kind of near where these ships are. I was seeing that battleship there, and it seems to keep getting stuck on the island, so it would be a very good target for my torpedoes. It's actually that Miyagi from earlier. But it's not actually having a huge impact on the battle right now, which we are actually losing. So I was not sure which to go for. So Myogi looks easy, but not that useful for my team. Although I suppose eventually it might be useful. You know, useful to get out of the game. Whereas these ones are a more immediate threat, but they all look much harder to hit than that Myogi. I actually can't decide here. Well, the decision was made for me when I saw those enemy fighters hovering over the enemy, well, fleet off to the west, so I decided I'm going to go for the Myogi since there aren't any fighters around here. And so I send my torpedo bombers to where I expect they can launch a perpendicular attack, but this time I order one of my dive bomber squadrons in first, and I hope these ones will be able to set a fire. And you'll see in a second.
Awaiting instructions.
There you go, 3 hits and actually did 2 fires. And I expect the Myogi will put those fires out, and then I get my torpedo bombers to launch a torpedo spread. I remember the Myogi's fast, so I aim a lot further in front of it than I would have liked, or I would have normally done. And then wait to get my bombers in position. And this looks good. Oh, yeah, we'll get a few hits here if they don't oh, did you say armed in time? 5 torpedo hits, which caused 2 floodings, or 2 of them caused flooding. So I actually ordered my last squadron of dive bombers onto this other battleship, because I think my flooding will actually be sufficient to sink that battleship without their help. And then since I've got nothing better to do, I thought about returning back, but I decided I'm just going to watch my dive bombers come in. And it's an American battleship, so it's actually got a lot of anti-aircraft guns. And there goes their bombs. I got 1 hit which started a fire, and managed to sink that Myogi at the same time. And yes, you see that battleship put out that fire pretty quickly, so it didn't do a lot of damage. And I've just been spotted. An enemy Cleveland cruiser, I believe that one from earlier, has managed to get all the way through our cap, and, well, it spotted me, and as I said, I'm too slow to run away. I'm already going full speed to, well, pretty much the best course I can to get behind that island. And it started hitting me. I just lost, well, actually a real big amount of my hit points. And I've been set on fire, so I put the fire out, and I've ordered my dive bombers, the 1 squadron I had ready to go and try and hit the Cleveland. And that's really unfortunate there. I managed to get my engine wrecked and set on fire again. And it's going to be a long time until I can repair those. Order my dive bombers in. This is basically my 1 chance of surviving here. I get 2 hits and start 2 fires, but it's not enough to sink that Cleveland. And, well, I end up getting sunk. Which, well, I kind of expected in that situation. As I said, I can't really escape. And my western, or the western flank of my team had collapsed, so I was actually heading straight into the bulk of the enemy fleet. Yeah. Not surprisingly, we end up losing this game. Still got 80,000 credits, 668 experience, which is actually less than I got in the previous game, but my team collapsed very quickly in this one. I still got top of my team. And you see 11 bomb hits and a few torpedoes, but those 5 torpedoes did about twice as much damage as the bombs. And it was real. I actually got a fair bit of damage from fires here. I didn't think I would. And a little bit, well, enough from flooding to sink that battleship. So, all in all, that's a pretty alright game considering it didn't actually last very long. This final game, it's in the fighter heavy loadout, which is the one I flew most often in this aircraft carrier. I get 2 squadrons of fighters and 1 squadron of one squadron of dive bombers. There are a couple of big disadvantages with this setup. The first is to do with the economy of it, which is you just don't get a lot of experience or credits for shooting down enemy aircraft. And dive bombers, they don't do a lot of damage, so, I mean, unless you are lucky enough to start a fire, which the enemy can't put out. So you don't make a lot of experience or credits with the setup. The other big disadvantage is that if the enemy team doesn't have any aircraft carriers, well, 2/3 of your aircraft actually have nothing to do. They're basically just scouting in that situation and maybe shooting down a few enemy scout planes, which doesn't do a lot for either team. But I do fly in this, or sail I should say, with this aircraft loadout because I actually have the most fun trying to defend my ships from enemy bombers. Well, at least I have a lot more fun doing that than I do trying to bomb enemy ships. Anyway, so what I've done is I've ordered my fighters to protect my allied ships, which fortunately the bulk of them are actually sailing as a group, so it's going to be very easy for me to cover them. And 12 fighters can basically counter almost any threat that comes up. I've seen 2 squadrons of enemy fighters pushing forward and an enemy dive bomber squadron. It's basically my opposite number has the exact same loadout as me. I ordered my fighters after the dive bomber, and then I actually order my aircraft carrier to a position where I think they're basically going to be able to intercept the enemy fighters, and then order my anti-aircraft guns to concentrate on an enemy fighter squadron. And meanwhile I'm just scouting out with my dive bombers. I spot a cruiser and figured that will do for now.
Group 4, we're under attack.
Our fighters have engaged, so I send my aircraft carrier to fly directly under the bombers, but I have to, under the fighters, but I order the anti-aircraft guns to fire on these dive bombers for a start. We've managed to destroy one of the fighter squadrons, but taken a fair few losses ourselves. And we get set on fire by the enemy dive bombers, but they don't do enough damage to really hurt us. And I lost one of my squadrons there, but the second fighter squadron's doing a lot of damage to the enemy fighters. And those dive bombers also ended up taking, well, a lot of casualties to my anti-aircraft guns. And it looks like my fighters are going to win this engagement. I'd like to say it was just something I do, but it's really just because I put the mods on my ship that give a bonus to my fighter's ability. And now I'm actually just trying to escape because there's an enemy, I think it's a cruiser, kind of pushing straight up towards me, which isn't a situation I want to be in. I mean, well, I've just been spotted by it, and I'm in a very slow ship, so it's going to take a long time before I can actually get out of its firing range. Fortunately, it gets torpedoed by my ally, at least I think it got torpedoed, it got destroyed by my ally at least. So I get lucky there, and that I don't take any damage from the enemy ship. See, there's 6 enemy fighters back up in the air. I don't think the enemy will actually have a lot of fighters left. I know that I don't. And they have taken more casualties than me. So I send my fighter squadron, my one that's currently up in the air. I was originally going to send and try and engage those fighters, but decided against this until I get all my fighters up in the air. Instead I order my second squadron of fighters to escort those dive bombers while they launch an attack against this enemy cruiser here. And I was hoping the enemy fighters would feel compelled to come and try and shoot down my bombers, and at that point I could kind of pounce on them with my fighters. I also changed my bomber's target to this destroyer, since dive bombers, they are fairly accurate at hitting destroyers. So you can kind of do some damage to them, and destroyers are hard to kill by other means.
Approaching target.
Yep, here come the enemy fighters. I did manage to sink that destroyer, but I didn't actually hit it. What happened is one of my bombs hit nearby and did a bit of splash damage. So I've got my first squadron of fighters there engaging the enemy, and my second squadron is coming in soon, and it's focused on destroying that one enemy fighter, and that will help out with the larger of the two enemy squadrons. There we go.
Group 3, target destroyed. Group 3, standing by for instructions. Over.
And this other squadron won't last very long either.
Group 3, target destroyed.
And I believe that is all the enemy fighters shot down. They still have a few dive bombers, but they won't last very long since I can effectively defend all of my allied ships since they are in such a tight group. I'll order both my fighters into the centre of the formation. There's no real reason for that. It was probably smarter to have them on the two edges so they'd be close to whichever direction the dive bombers came from. But my ships are close enough that it kind of doesn't really matter. My allied ships, I should say. One of my dive bombers to launch an attack on that cruiser, and I kind of ignore them actually. Well, that cruiser gets sunk anyway, so now we're just trying to hunt down the last two enemy ships. And oddly enough, I still haven't actually landed a hit with my bombers in this game, but I've killed 23 aircraft. As we know, my opposition is also a Bogue, and at worst it's got 24 aircraft, at best it's got 28. So that Bogue's down to, well, either 1 or 5 aircraft, and that's assuming that no one on my team has shot down any either. So that enemy Bogue could be out of aircraft right now. But, well, a bit of a spoiler, it's actually gone AFK. Possibly I shot down all of its aircraft, or possibly because it's just rage quit. Whatever. But we've spotted the last enemy ship that's not AFK. And line up my bombers. And it's a St. Louis, so it doesn't have a lot of anti-aircraft guns.
Group 4, engaging enemy. Group
Got 2
4,
hits, and I
we're
managed to set it on
under
fire.
attack. Group 4, returning.
Which, well, the fire burnt for a little while, but it put it out. And now it's under fire from a lot of my allied ships. And it's not going to survive this for very much longer. Although it's putting up quite a fight, and I think its armour's actually holding up quite well against my allied shells, so I might get a chance for a second bombing run in here. I doubt it though. My bombers are only just now reaching my aircraft carrier. I'm keeping my fighters manoeuvring around so they can try and cover our cruisers. I think it's a bit, at this point I thought it was a bit odd that I hadn't seen any enemy aircraft for a while, but I hadn't quite realised that the enemy carrier was AFK. And basically the rest of this match is just me scouting around with my dive bombers to try and find the enemy aircraft carrier, which I do find eventually, but it takes quite a while. So I'll skip that for you, and we will go straight to the end of the game. So here we are scouting. Most of my team's actually in the cap circle, just trying to win it by... well, we've got to win it some way, and this guy's actually proving very difficult to find. But, well, my fighters just managed to spot it right in the corner of the map, which I'd actually scouted a bit earlier, but I obviously hadn't quite into the corner. But doesn't matter, because we win anyway. 73,000 credits and 1,500 experience. I wasn't best in my team, but that's mainly because you don't get a lot of credits for shooting down enemy aircraft. You also note that of the 3 games, I think that's the least credits I earned as well, considering that I won. So that's what I was talking about with the economy. You don't get a lot of rewards for doing well in a fighter-heavy loadout. And yeah, this is the Bogue. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I'll see you all next time.